I've been living in the southwest of Western Australia for most of my life now, but there's one particular holiday tradition I do almost every year. I drive in my car down to a place called the Stirling Ranges. Now, the Stirling Ranges is about 3 hours drive from my house. It's a mountain range. That should tell you that there actually is no other mountain range near us. Where we live, it's a very flat area with some rolling hills, but nothing like a mountain range. So the Stirlings are my escape to a mountain range to go and do the mountain climbing through the trails and just enjoy that type of different environment. But this one particular time I went down, I went in the car on this day with my daughter and my dad. We drove all the way down. We'd been driving for about 2.5 hours. I then pull over at one stage to a petrol station to go and get fuel. Fill up with fuel. I walk into the station. I'm in that station for about 10 minutes. And then I walk back out to the car, sat in the car, turned to my dad and my daughter, and I said, "We're not going to the Stirlings, we're going home." And we drove all the way back. So the question is, what actually happened in that service station to stop me going to the Stirlings? What happened was I went in there to go and get fuel, and when I went in, there was a farmer who was paying for fuel for his car, and this farmer was telling the lady behind the counter that there had actually been a thunderstorm of rain that morning down in the Stirlings, and the rain had come down so heavy and it was so unexpected that it's flooded over the two main roads to the Stirlings. And when I heard him say that, I said to the farmer, I said, "Oh, we're going to the Stirlings." And he looked at me and he said, "Unless you've got a really good four-wheel drive, don't bother. It's too dangerous." You see, I'd walked in that service station with a plan for my day. I was going to the Stirlings. And what happened was, it was an unexpected conversation, unplanned, from someone I had no idea was going to be there. But this one simple conversation changed the direction of my life that day. It's kind of symbolic for me because as I look back on my life, I've come to a conclusion there have been times where I've changed direction in life, not just on a trip to a holiday, but I actually mean direction in the way I see something, or direction in decision making, or direction in how I perceive a particular issue that's ahead of me. And it doesn't come because I've gone to some large conference where there's thousands of people and there's this amazing dynamic speaker, or it's because I've signed up for this 8-week course. It's because there's been this person unexpectedly has said something to me without them being aware that's actually changed a part of my life. Sometimes in a painful way, sometimes in a positive way, but it's often been unexpected and from someone I didn't expect to hear it from. It's been on my mind quite recently that I'm someone who's done a lot of public speaking in my life. It's been part of my career. A lot of public speaking in churches, which I was used to doing 35 plus minute talks. But 12 years ago, I joined a school and started working as a school chaplain. Now, when you give a talk at assembly to kids, it's a totally different ballgame. You cannot speak for 35 minutes to children at an assembly because it will cause a riot. Within 5 minutes, kids start to get so bored, they start sticking fingers up noses and fingers in other kids' hair, and they start to become a real trouble. So you can't do that to kids. You've got 5 minutes with kids, 5 minutes to talk, and then you need to stop. But I guess the more I look back on that, I've started to realise that for many of the sermons that I've been preaching to people, if people were really honest with me, I reckon I could go up to those people a few days after I've preached and ask them, "How much can you remember of my sermon?" I think at best they'd remember 5 minutes. They might remember a story, they might remember a saying, but they don't remember 35 minutes. You see, there's something about the power of God to speak to us in short, sharp bursts, and often through the most unexpected sources and through the most unexpected people. It doesn't have to be some amazing, big, dynamic, high-powered event. It doesn't have to be this long, high articulate sermon. God can speak to us in any way he chooses. And that's been on my mind to do this particular thing I've looked at called Got 10. And Got 10's really asking a question: have you got 10 minutes to put aside for God to speak to you? And my commitment is to make sure that when I do these talks always stop well and truly before 10 minutes. 10 minutes is probably all you need for God to speak to you. And so that's the hope, that I can do these talks for you, and within 10 minutes, you've actually heard God say something to you that will stick to your heart. Now, when it comes to 10-minute conversations in the Bible, there is a recorded conversation that would have gone for about 10 minutes. It's a conversation in John's Gospel. It's between a woman from Samaria and Jesus of Nazareth. It happens at a well. And in John's account, this woman turns up at the well, not knowing who Jesus is, not knowing that he would even be there. She's turned up simply to get water. That's her only motivation. She comes in the afternoon, which is unusual for the women of the day because they always came in groups in the morning. But she's a social outcast from her community, so she comes alone. And as she draws water, a 10-minute conversation breaks out between her and Christ. And within that 10 minutes, her life, her way of thinking is turned about 180 degrees. She makes a discovery as part of the conversation that Jesus knows almost everything about her personal life. More importantly, he knows everything about her personal embarrassments in life, shames. And those shames are attached to 4 failed marriages and currently being involved with another person who's not her husband. And that shame and embarrassment for her must have thrown her completely that this Jewish man would even know this. But what is probably even more profound for her is that as she listens to Jesus tell her about her past, it's almost as if Christ is saying, I haven't heard any of this third hand through gossip. I have been journeying with you your whole life. I have seen it, and I have been there during that time. And this woman, who is so moved by Jesus' response to her, realizes he is something else. He isn't just a Jewish man. He may be the Christ. And as Jesus confirms that is the truth, he is the Christ, she picks up and runs back to her village, and she communicates to the village that the Christ may have come. This woman who arrived at the well as a social reject, as someone who probably carried so much shame, now runs away as an ambassador for God, a representative of Christ. The conversation is 10 minutes. It wasn't planned. It just happened at the well. But it was planned. It was always planned by Christ. It was his decision to go to the well. You see, 10 minutes, almost when it impacts us on an eternal level, it's as if time slows down. During that 10-minute period, something happens which is so transforming, it's almost as if there is this warp in time and everything seems to go into that slow motion. It's no surprise to me that when we look at all the accounts of Jesus' conversations in Scripture, there are all sorts of conversations that would have gone for hours with people, particularly if Jesus was at people's places having tea with them. But this 10-minute conversation at the well, this short burst, completely unexpected and unplanned from the woman's point of view, actually goes down in all 4 Gospels as the longest recorded conversation between Jesus and a person. This 10 minutes gets the largest chunk of text of any other conversation, almost as if time itself stands still during that 10 minutes. 10 minutes may be all it takes to have a life-transforming moment where eternity stands still in your heart, God speaks to you, and the change begins to happen. That's the challenge. Have you got 10 minutes to put aside? 10 minutes for God to speak to you and change the direction of your life.